Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's HR Advice webinar, How to Address Performance Issues in the First 2 Years of Employment. My name's Alice, and I'm going to be one of your hosts and presenters for the session, and I'm joined today by some very special guests from Advisor Plus, who we will introduce very shortly. And let's go ahead and introduce ourselves now. So my name is Alice. I am a learning facilitator here at Sage, and I do specialise in webinars. So you might have seen me before if you've attended any of the Sage 50 payroll webinars, and do some kind of other products too. But I'm joined today by Advisor Plus HR Business Partner Sophie and Senior HR Advisor Denise, and they're going to share their expertise on setting clear performance expectations, the value of regular feedback, and how to identify and manage underperformance during the early stages of employment. So yeah, if you want to introduce yourselves, it's over to you, Sophie.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie. I've worked in HR for 20 years now in various roles, and I'm currently an internal HR business partner for Advisor Plus. And I also lead a team of consultants, and between us, we support with a variety of HR consultancy projects for customers of all sizes and industries. Denise, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, fab. Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everyone. I'm Denise. I've worked in HR for 10 years. I'm a team coach at AP, supporting a group of advisors to provide a HR service to the Sage client. I've got experience dealing with lots of different HR topics, such as performance, capability, grievance, high-risk disciplinary cases, and flexible working. So the main part of my role is to support the team on the advice line and provide guidance to managers dealing with HR issues within their business.
Great, thanks to both of you for that. And let's also take a look at what we're going to cover in today's session. So our expert advisors, they will be talking about setting clear performance expectations, the value of regular feedback and development opportunities, and identifying and managing underperformance early. And as I said, if you would like to access the slides from today, don't forget to download the handout. And just kind of for later as well, you will receive an email, probably this afternoon sometime, with a recording of today's session. So you can watch that back as many times as you would like on demand. And we will share any links to the portal as well of the policies and areas that you do need to kind of pay particular attention to. And I'll share a bit more about how to access these at the end of the session. But without further ado, let's get going. So, Sophie, would you be able to start us off with a bit of an overview of best practice when setting clear performance expectations? And could you also kind of give us your thoughts on why it's so important to work with a new employee in the first few months of employment to kind of ensure that they are performing to the required standard?
Yes, certainly. So onboarding new employees is an investment in terms of time as well as cost. So we want to make sure that we really set people up for success. It's essential to give employees clarity in what's expected of them and what good looks like. And that should start right from the recruitment process. So in the job advert and interview process, to ensure that the candidate knows what they'd be doing and as such whether they believe they've got the skills needed. And then again, there should be clarity about expectations all through the new starter inductions, probation reviews, and then into the regular performance development and appraisal life cycle. In the first few months, the employee will no doubt be on a learning curve and getting up to speed with the role. So talk through the job description and the objectives with them. Managers will probably have an idea of what tasks they'd expect the new colleague to be up to speed with and by when. And so it can help you both to map out which tasks you expect them to be competent in as the priorities and the timescale that you'd expect them to achieve it in. So for example, you might agree that in month 1, I'll do this task and you observe. In month 2, you do it with my supervision. And then in month 3, I'd expect you to be doing this independently. So that way you can both see if the individual is tracking as they ought to be. A good induction plan would typically include a schedule, at least for the first week or 2, with time committed in diaries with their manager to discuss tasks and priorities, and also side-by-side time with colleagues to observe tasks where possible, and time for any mandatory training that your company might require them to complete, and any other training that they need for that specific role. Managers should have regular check-ins with the new staff member to check their understanding and ensure that they've got what they need and they're settling in okay. And committing that time and building that working relationship in those first few weeks can mean that the employee feels able to ask questions when they don't understand, and they know that it's okay to ask what might be quite basic questions before it feels like it's too late. So ensure you've helped them to build relationships with yourself and with a network of colleagues who they'll need to refer to and who they can go to for that help that they need when they're new to the role. And then following on from induction, managers should have regular reviews of progress in probation. So make sure you know the length of your new starter's probation period, which should be in their contract. There should be regular probation reviews, and in those you would include what the employee's doing well, some honest feedback about anything that's not gone well, and ask any support that they might need. And even if the employee is performing brilliantly from the start, then don't let those probation reviews fall by the wayside. And really importantly, document all those discussions and the support that you're offering as you go. If there are concerns with the employee later down the line, you'll then have this audit trail of support from the early stages.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. I agree. It's really important to document everything, even if it's a note in your calendar or a quick email. I do find I often speak to managers who want to end a new starter's probation quite quickly, but it's quite hard to support them in this situation when the timescales are really short and there's a lack of evidence in the form of feedback and support from the manager. This then makes it hard to evidence that the employee is being given a fair opportunity to improve throughout the process.
Thanks, Sophie, and Denise as well. And on probation, does the new Employment Rights Bill have relevance in terms of how we should manage in the first 2 years of employment?
Yes, it will do. So we should touch here on the new Employment Rights Bill that was released a few weeks ago. So currently, employees must have 2 years service to bring an unfair dismissal claim against their employer. So unless there's discrimination, employers can dismiss with relatively lower risk within that first 2-year period. It's been confirmed that with the new bill, this 2-year service requirement will be dropped, so that unfair dismissal instead will become a day one right to claim. And the purpose of that is to give employees strengthened protections and better job security from day one. So instead, the new bill will introduce the concept of what's being called an initial period of employment, which is not yet specified, but the expectation is that it will be 9 months. And during that initial time, a light touch procedure for employers to follow for dismissals, for performance or conduct would be expected, and the employees would have a modified right to make a claim. So now we don't currently know what that light touch procedure will look like, but the indication from the government is that it should include, as a minimum, holding a meeting with the employee to explain the concerns about their performance and allowing them to be accompanied. At the moment, many employers might have probation periods of 3 months, or you might have it in place for 6 months. So what we might see is employers deciding to make that contractual probation for new starters 9 months, or whatever that period ends up being, to effectively extend that initial period where the light touch procedure can apply and the employee is not able to rely on the full unfair dismissal rules. And also making sure that your contracts for new starters include an option to extend probation if there are concerns. You'll want to really stay on top of managing and supporting people while they're in probation and really checking that performance is where it needs to be while the person is still in probation, and evidencing that in writing as you go. And employers will also want to make sure that their recruitment processes are really robust. So you're getting the right people in the first place, as it will be harder to rely on the option of a speedier exit if it turns out that the individual isn't a good fit and they're out of that initial period of employment. But the bill and those changes won't take effect until autumn 2026. So there is time for employees to plan ahead for this, and we'll find out more about it. And in the meantime, an employee still needs 2 years service to claim unfair dismissal, again, providing there isn't discrimination.
Great, thank you. That is great current advice for us to bear in mind. And so once we have set kind of clear expectations and supported through induction and into probation, what do managers need to do next? In particular, if they do identify a problem with an employee's performance?
Yeah, okay, so regular one-to-ones or check-ins should happen throughout employment and be documented. Usually an individual will have objectives, performance objectives, either set for a year or perhaps quarterly, which should be specific and measurable, that managers would review with them throughout that performance cycle. Regular one-to-ones help create a climate of open communication and feedback with the aim of being able to nip potential issues in the bud before they escalate into a bigger problem. So regular check-ins give the employee the opportunity to express any concerns, to ask for help, and for a general welfare check-in with them as well. So if you as a manager identify an issue with performance, this should be addressed as soon as possible. Otherwise, it can be quite a confusing message for the employee as to whether the issue is acceptable or whether it is in fact serious. Performance policies or capability policies will generally recommend that the first step is informal resolution. And that could simply be the manager in a one-to-one bringing the employee's attention to a concern. And we'd recommend that would be fact-based where possible. So, for example, if it's a target that's been missed or an error that's been made, bring the figures or the specific details to that one-to-one to review together. And these early conversations should be constructive. So you're aiming to enable an improvement, and they should be open-minded as well. So it could be that there is a simple misunderstanding that can be resolved there and then.
Yeah, and it is difficult giving feedback as well. It's a difficult thing to do that, particularly negative feedback. It can be quite daunting. So do you have any tips for this to keep it constructive, as you say?
Yeah, sure, and it can be, and that's perfectly natural. So depending on your workplace, you'd ideally find somewhere quiet and confidential, if there is somewhere, to have a chat. Give yourself enough time so you're not in a rush, so the employee can see that you're there ready to support them where you can. That can help it keep that constructive feel to it. As I said, be prepared with the facts to hand, and I'd even suggest preparing your opener to the conversation to get it off on the right foot. And by that I mean plan the key message and how you will phrase it. So it should be clear and it should be honest, with the message that employee is taking away being one of something's got to change, but support is available. So as well as that, and as simple as this sounds, keeping a slow pace and a steady tone, slowing your words down can be a great simple trick to keep the chat non-confrontational, and don't what we call rescue them, which can be tempting to do when we feel bad or uncomfortable, such as by saying, you're not performing, but it's not that bad, don't worry about it. That can give quite a confusing message. So you could open up by saying something like, I wanted to chat to you because I've noticed some errors in your work over the last few weeks, and I'm keen to understand why you think it's happening and how we can get you back on track. So something like that is factual, it's not confrontational, and it's with a focus on looking forward to an improvement with support. We'd also recommend that managers consider what's driving the issue. So is it definitely performance capability, or could it be conduct? i.e., is the issue there because the employee doesn't have the skills, the knowledge, or the capability, or is it actually there because of a lack of will, so they're choosing not to do something? And if it's the latter, it's a potential disciplinary matter and a different procedure to follow. Or in some cases, it could be a personal factor impacting performance. So again, another reason to build good, trusting working relationships and a safe climate for your team members to talk to you when something's wrong. I'm conscious that Denise has got lots of experience in supporting managers with identifying the root cause of these problems. So Denise, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So in terms of the root cause, it's really important to establish whether the employee is struggling with the performance due to personal factors. It could be health problems, or in some circumstances a disability. So it can often be difficult to identify the root cause of the problem if you're not having these open and honest conversations with the employees. So as Sophie explained, having regular check-ins and making sure the team know that you can approach them and they can approach you is really beneficial. Hopefully employees do feel comfortable to provide this type of information to you at the start of their employment with regards to their health and well-being. This will also help you consider any adjustments that might need to be put in place to support them within their role. In an ideal situation, the employee would be open and honest from the start, but that's not always the case, and employees can find it hard to talk about a disability or an underlying health condition. So it's important as line managers, it's your responsibility to address these issues and create a culture where the employee feels able to talk to their manager and be open and honest about the support that they need. Okay, with that in mind, do you want to talk about the type of probing questions that we might use, Sophie, to draw those kind of things out or ask the questions and create that culture with the employee?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So after that initial opener that you planned that I talked about, it can be good to prepare some probing questions to help the employee just provide you with a little bit more information rather than just getting yes and no answers from them. So simple examples of that might be things like, just tell me a bit more about that from your perspective, or how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that task? Talk to me about what support you think would help, and simply saying, is there anything else that you think could be impacting you in work, because that might just give them the opportunity to open up and show that you're there to listen. And also pause to allow them plenty of time to respond. So as Denise said, it can be hard to share personal information. So if you say, I'm really keen to get your views or what's on your mind, give them plenty of time before you then jump in. We all sometimes feel awkward about silence, but try not to feel it too much when you've asked them a question, so they can take a moment to gather their thoughts and they can see that you're there to listen to them. And if the employer brings up any medical conditions that they think could be impacting them in work, I should point out here that as an employer, adjustments should be considered to support them, and that is a requirement in UK employment legislation. So the Equality Act does state that employers must make reasonable adjustments to support employees, workers and contractors, and also job applicants.
Thank you both of you for that. Really insightful. So Denise as well, under that kind of topic there, what type of condition could be covered under the Equality Act? And also, how would you know when an adjustment is suitable?
Yeah, okay, so many conditions could be covered, and some of them you wouldn't necessarily expect would be covered and considered as a disability. It could be anything that has an impact on the individual's day-to-day tasks, or has lasted or could last 12 months or more. So this could range from someone who has a physical disability, they could be hard of hearing, it may be cancer or other diseases, but also things like asthma, IBS, anxiety and depression. So in terms of adjustments, this can also be very broad. So factors such as dyslexia, ADHD can have an impact on learning and development, but often with the right adjustments such as verbal rather than written instructions, things like screen reading software or additional time to complete tasks, with those kind of things in place, most employees will be able to perform their role at a really good rate. So adjustments for someone with a chronic back condition, this could be an adjustable chair, a DSE assessment and a workstation assessment, or regular rest breaks. So it's important that the employee should not be discriminated against due to their disability or their underlying health condition, as we've explained as part of the Equality Act.
And with that in mind, Denise, how can a business determine what is reasonable and then what's not reasonable?
Well, it can be difficult to determine what is reasonable versus what's not reasonable. So an employer should never make assumptions with regards to the employee's condition. It's important to bear in mind that the adjustments put in place must be reasonable for both parties involved. So for example, if an employee who uses a wheelchair, they ask a small business to install a lift so that they can access the upper floor of the workplace, the employer could look into this and find that the cost would be damaging to the business. The employer can actually turn this down as a request, as it might not be reasonable. However, they may make other workplace adjustments that are reasonable to support the employee. For example, making changes so the employee can do their job entirely from the ground floor. It's always good to seek guidance from an expert. An option could be to consider completing an occupational health referral to get specialist advice on the adjustments that need to be put in place to support the employee. OH also may make recommendations based on medical information that will help an employee to manage their condition whilst achieving the requirement of the role. Examples of adjustments we often see on HR cases that we support are things like providing accessible car parking spaces, distributed someone's breaks more evenly across the day, or completing a DSE assessment to ensure their workspace is set up properly. So linking this back to performance, speak to the employee to understand their condition and how it's impacting their performance, and try and establish together what might work to support them to enable their performance to get better. So it's important to get the right support in place at the start of the process to set the employee up for success. So once the adjustments are in place, if there are any further performance concerns later down the line, the business are in a really good place and really good position to demonstrate the support that's already been implemented. And getting this right in the initial stages really helps to manage the risk during the performance process and to minimise any complaints that the employee could raise later down the line.
And if you don't mind if I just jump in here, I might just make a brief point about menopause, as it's quite timely. So we're seeing an increasing number of cases where it transpires that an employee is not performing due to them suffering with symptoms of the menopause. And we could run a whole webinar on that alone. But I'd just say here that in these cases, we'd encourage managers to really listen to the individual, give serious consideration to adjustments and support for that person. Don't make any assumptions. And that support could be regular check-ins and reminders around priorities, which can help with what's often referred to as brain fog, or adjustments to breaks, to uniform, etc. And in some cases, like Denise mentioned, a referral to occupational health for some more medical advice.
Yeah, that is a really important topic. It is one that could absolutely be relevant in a performance situation too. So let's actually start to look at the process. So once a performance issue has been identified, what steps does that typically follow?
Okay, so most performance procedures will start with an informal stage, and the process through the formals then progress through to the formal stages with potential warnings. So it could usually be a written warning, then a final written warning, and ultimately building up into dismissal if there's no improvement within the performance. So if we consider the first stage of the informal stages then, so to combat performance concerns in the initial stages, it's best practice to observe and reflect on the work the employee's been completing. It's good to highlight any development areas and set some clear objectives on what the employee needs to achieve. So performance management procedures should be clearly set out in the business policy, and it's really helpful to have a clear job description to identify what's expected of the employee within their role. So when establishing and engaging in a capability performance process, always remember the employee should not be discriminated against due to a protective characteristic such as age, race, sex, pregnancy or maternity leave. So a good starting point is setting some clear objectives. The clearer the performance measure can be, the smaller the risk of disagreement or claims of unfairness that may arise during the process later on down the line. So you may have heard of SMART objectives. So we've got specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time bound. So during the initial stages of raising performance concerns with the employee, it's always advisable to use a performance improvement plan. This helps to document the objectives and the weekly feedback that the manager is having with the employee. So templates to support this process can be found on the Sage site if you're an existing Sage HR user, or ACAS are really good in terms of templates that you may need, so you can access them on there as well. So ideally, you should sit down with the employee to agree the objectives on the plan. This would include what measures that will be in place, so they're fully aware of what is expected of them in order to pass the plan. At this stage of the process, it's also good to discuss any support or additional training the employee might need to help them achieve the objectives. By agreeing the detail on the plan together, initially, this can also reduce any challenges from the employee during the process as the plan has been agreed together.
Thanks, Denise. And Sophie, you did touch on this earlier, but what might training and development look like to support the success at this stage?
Yeah, thank you. So as I touched on before, good quality induction is really key, and then tailoring training for the individual as well. So be mindful that not everyone learns in the same way, and training can be delivered via various different methods, whether it's e-learning, it could be pairing up with a buddy or an expert as a mentor, on-the-job shadowing, reading process documents or observing a task that they're finding challenging, or it might be that more structured training workshops, evaluation and feedback is needed. So chat to the individual about how they learn best. And those regular one-to-ones that we've been talking about help build that positive working relationship where there's that mutual trust, which will help the person to feel like they can admit what they're struggling with and that they can ask for help. I'd always reiterate to managers that a performance improvement plan should be a shared document, and to ask the employee what specific support they feel would help them with each of the objectives, and almost complete that document together so it's shared by both of you. Check that they really understand the objectives and what improvement is needed. And then again, documenting these discussions and what's been offered and provided will help demonstrate the support that the business has put in place. As you can tell, we can't stress enough about the importance of documenting things as you go.
No, definitely. And Denise as well. So what type of time frame would you suggest for a performance improvement plan?
Okay, so a realistic timeframe for the employee to achieve the objectives must be added to the plan, and weekly documented feedback should also be provided. So we say 4 weeks is usually a really good starting point, as long as you believe that the objectives can be achieved within that timeframe and also reviewed and fed back to the employee. So for example, if the employee is making some improvement, but there are a couple of areas still outstanding, you may also want to consider extending the plan to give the employee a little bit more time to provide the evidence they can to achieve their goals. So documented feedback will help the employee to understand if they're on track or off track to achieve the objectives. When it comes to the final meeting to confirm the outcome of the plan, it should never be a shock to the employee. They should be well informed of how they're getting on throughout the time the plan's in place and throughout the process. So hopefully the performance concerns can be resolved informally. If this is the case, it's a good idea to keep a record of any documented discussions that you've had with the employee regarding their performance, if you need to refer back to them later down the line. So I would also explain to the employee that you'll continue to monitor the performance to confirm the improvements being maintained moving forward.
And you've discussed the initial informal stage, but unfortunately it's not always possible to resolve performance issues informally. And as you referenced, in some circumstances, a formal meeting will need to be arranged to address the concerns. Would you be able to talk us through this?
Yeah, of course. So it's important to get the steps right. I'd always advise the manager they should arrange a meeting as soon as possible, unless there's unforeseeable circumstances or delays, such as annual leave. So we have a couple of different approaches. A lower risk approach would be where the employee should be invited to a meeting in writing, informing them of the right to be accompanied by a colleague or a trade union representative. So the invite letter and the outcome letter templates can also be found on the Sage site if you're a Sage HR user, or again, if not, ACAS does have some letter templates available that you can use and adapt. So there's different letters for different potential outcomes relevant to the level of warning that you're considering and putting in place following the formal meeting. So the employee must be given reasonable notice of the meeting in order to prepare. So 48 hours is typically sufficient, but check your policy that you've got in place if you do have one to make sure what you're putting in place specifies what you've agreed and what's written in the policy in case it's something different. So ideally, we would always advise that you have a note taker in the meeting so that you can concentrate on the meeting rather than having to write notes as well as talk to the employee and go through the plan. So during the meeting, you discuss the plan that's been in place and the feedback that's been provided. If the employee's not achieved the objectives on the plan, you need to be able to evidence this and explain why they've not met the required standard. This is why we suggested earlier that keeping a really clear record of what has been discussed during the process really helps you as you continue through. So it's essential to always adjourn after you've had the formal meeting as well before you deliver an outcome, as there should never be a prejudged decision before you've gone into that formal meeting. Ideally, reconvene the meeting and deliver the outcome face-to-face if you can, and you should explain the decision and then provide the outcome letter, which will have the details of the sanction. So the outcome could be issued, could be a warning. It could be that you take no further action or reissue a previous warning, but you must be able to support the reason for the outcome in detail. So typically warnings would go in order of first written, final written, with the opportunity to demonstrate an improvement before being invited to a final meeting where dismissal could be possible. So the note taker should provide the notes to the employee in the meeting as a reference of what's been discussed. Following the outcome, the employee does have the right to appeal the decision. So alongside a warning and in line with the low risk approach, a further plan would be put in place to continue with the process and support the employee to achieve their objectives that were originally set out. So following the outcome of the plan, the best possible situation is that the employee will pass the plan and the process will end. If the employee does not pass the plan, the next plan, then you would arrange, and then the next plan along, then you'd arrange a further meeting to review the progress and the objectives on the plan and to confirm an outcome. So if warnings have been issued and you are inviting to a final meeting, the invite letter must state the potential outcome if dismissal with notice is going to be considered. So again, it's essential that the warning stages are detailed in the business policy that you've got in place so the employee can refer to this if required.
Thanks, Denise. All really useful information. And so we have talked about a low risk approach. What steps would the manager take for a more commercial approach that would involve more risk to the business?
Yeah, okay, so that's a really good question. So we often have managers who want to take a more commercial approach when it comes to managing performance concerns with an employee, particularly during the probation period. So making a commercial decision, such as dismissal with no other sanction, may have some element of risk attached to it. So although we've explained earlier, if the right support has been in place for the employee from the early stages of employment, this can help minimise the risk. When we speak to managers on cases, they usually want to move straight to a formal meeting. This can often be due to the seriousness of the performance concern that's being raised. So, for example, the situation maybe when it's appropriate to move straight to a formal meeting might be because there's been a health or a safety breach, or a safety critical element of the role has not been done correctly, where there's a zero tolerance approach. And sometimes it could be related to a data breach where the employee has not carried out the correct procedure within their role. So it's still important to get the steps right. So where there is a performance concern which needs to be addressed urgently, the manager should arrange a formal meeting as soon as possible, unless there are some delays as previously discussed. The employee should be invited to a meeting in writing, informing them of the right to be accompanied by a colleague or a trade union representative. The invite letter should state the possible outcome of dismissal with notice. It's important to consider all the facts and the information collated at the meeting and talk through any support that's been in place, training that's been completed, and highlight any areas of development or errors that have happened during the plan. So we would still advise that you always adjourn the meeting before you deliver the outcome. Take on board any mitigation that's been presented by the employee during the meeting. If you are considering dismissal, then ideally this outcome should be delivered on the same day to reduce any stress the employee may be experiencing going through the process. So when considering the sanction, taking into account precedents as well is also really important within the business. So a good benchmark is, for example, you wouldn't give one employee a final written warning and then dismiss another employee for the same performance concern, as this could be considered as unfair treatment. So if dismissal is an appropriate outcome, it should be clear to the employee the seriousness of the performance concern, and an outcome letter should also be delivered to support your rationale.
Thank you. That's some really great advice from both of you as well. So thanks for sharing your thoughts and advice with us today. But following on from this, we have had quite a few questions coming through in the questions panel. So before we do kind of close things off for today, I did wonder if we could tackle a few of these together. The first one that I've got for you is, when taking a more commercial approach, for example, going straight to the formal meeting to address the concern, if some elements of training or other support have been missed, what's the risk to the business? Sophie, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So in terms of risks, there are potentially increased risks if, for example, there was a medical condition or a neurodivergence, such as dyslexia, for example. You'd need to be really comfortable that reasonable adjustments have been explored and provided, and also that there's been enough of an opportunity for that person to demonstrate an improvement, that you've given them time to do that following those adjustments being put in place. If training has been promised and not provided, then there would be a question naturally about how fair that was to the individual, and added risk if there were protected characteristics, which Denise referenced earlier, and the individual felt that they'd not been given the same opportunity to succeed for reasons of discrimination. But if the area of underperformance is a really fundamental part of their role and it cannot be sustained, then there are circumstances where it is justified to jump to that final stage meeting, as Denise referenced, without working up through the warnings. And sometimes it's down to the person's understanding as opposed to something that you can train.
Great, thanks, Sophie. The next question I've got as well, this one is, if an employee is underperforming with regards to their behaviour, but which doesn't represent a clear conduct issue, such as having a negative approach when contributing to discussion, how would I manage this type of situation?
It's a great question. It's one that comes up a lot. So, for example, a manager might say that a team member has a negative attitude or that they're not a team player, and it can be really hard to evidence that sort of thing. So, if you have a set of company values, then often you'll find that those types of behaviours can be covered off through requiring your employees to live the company values. So, potentially, a performance improvement plan could be put in place on those examples, being as specific as possible. Or some companies have behaviours as part of performance appraisal, so not just the what, but the how, behavioural indicators. And these can then be used to craft a performance improvement plan with the areas to be improved. If you don't have either of those in place, you could consider how you can position the examples for a PIP. So, for example, if there's an issue with the person having a negative attitude in meetings, you could put in place an objective to develop their positive communication, being more solutions focused, and coach them on how they could contribute differently.
Great, thank you. And you have talked through a procedure for managing performance. This next one here. So with us being a small business, we don't have a policy in place to address these concerns. Do we need a policy? And if so, how do we go about this?
Yeah, so we would recommend having a managing performance policy, yeah. If you're a Sage subscriber, we've got resources to help with that. And otherwise, if you need to produce a policy, ACAS, who Denise referenced earlier, have some great guidance for employers on how to do that and what to include. Typically, it should include what's meant by underperformance, so when it will be applied, informal resolution stages, such as feedback and introducing a performance improvement plan, and then the steps which Denise outlined for managing underperformance, so those different stages, and then ultimately up to dismissal and how that would be handled.
Thank you, Sophie. The next one I've got as well, this one is, with regards to extending a performance improvement plan, how long would a reasonable time frame be for an extension?
Okay, I can take that one. So it usually depends on the objectives and how achievable these are. As a guide, we would normally say 4 weeks would be reasonable, although it would really be dependent on setting the employee up for success to achieve the objectives on the plan. If the objectives can't be achieved within the 4 weeks, then you might want to consider 6 weeks. Or if you only need a shorter period of time just to see that little bit of consistency, you may just want to put 2 weeks in terms of the extension. It's really kind of down to management discretion and what works best for setting the employee up for success and helping them to achieve the objectives on the plan.
Thanks, Denise. And another one I've got for you as well. So during the informal stages of managing performance, if the employee asks for representation in the meeting, can we refuse this?
Okay, so whilst there's no automatic right to representation in an informal meeting like this, we'd encourage you to consider whether there's good reason to refuse. So it could be more constructive quite often in a meeting if an employee is allowed for there to be accompanied in the meeting for moral support. It could be, in some cases, it could be a reasonable adjustment for an employee to allow this. So we wouldn't necessarily say no. I suppose it's just considering what's best for the employee and for the business to get the best out of the meeting.
Great, thank you. Next one as well, so this one's about menopause. So you touched on menopause and putting adjustments in place. Would our business need a menopause policy in place, and how would we go about implementing this? Sophie, do you want to take that one, as you did reference that a bit earlier?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So it's probably still considered what might be classed as a progressive policy, a menopause policy, and perhaps not felt to be as critical as having a performance policy in place. But we would advise you to explore putting in place a menopause policy. It's a really important topic, one that's I'm sure lots of you are aware is more widely being talked about as the stigma is gradually broken down. Having a policy is a really great way to inform managers and employees and outline how employees would be supported, and also how they can seek support themselves. Again, if you're a Sage subscriber, you can get support with this, and there are some resources online on how to go about that if you want to write your own menopause policy.
Thank you so much. And thank you for those questions as well. Some really great answers too. I do think that's about all we've got time for in terms of questions this morning. Hopefully you have found it a valuable session today. And as a reminder, I can see there are a few questions we haven't answered. So if we weren't able to cover this off live today, we will be following up with you personally after the session. So you will still get an answer to your question. So Sophie and Denise, thank you so much for your insight and practical guidance today. It has been a really great session. But a few things before we kind of end the session. If you would like any help with anything that we've covered today, please feel free to check out any of the topics covered in the Sage HR Advice portal. Or alternatively, if you are a professional or premium customer, don't hesitate to call the advice line. We do have loads of really helpful consultants there, and they'll be more than happy to provide any guidance on the topics that we've covered today. And just to let you know about a couple of other things too. So alongside Sage Payroll, we do offer other people solutions such as Sage HR and Sage HR Advice. So Sage HR does enable you to automate and simplify your HR tasks, and it does just help to ensure that you manage your employees fairly and consistently. You support productivity, well-being, and job satisfaction within your workforce too. Then other side of things, we do have Sage HR Advice that's there to help you navigate and simplify these proposed changes, and just to help make sure that you do remain up to date with the latest employment law, health and safety legislation, etc. And speaking of Sage HR Advice, we do have some brand new services to offer to you. So if you don't have it yet, here's just a couple of good reasons why you should. So we do have small business toolkits now to kind of follow and help you prepare for specific things, including legislation changes. We've also got a brand new digital e-learn library with over 200 e-learning courses available to all professional and premium customers. And this does get updated every month with new content, so you will remain up to date and have a variety of kind of training there too. And then lastly, based on feedback from our customers, we do now offer additional services such as on-site health and safety risk assessments, IOSH qualifications, and so much more. So if you do want to find out more about this, definitely head to our HR Advice website, where you will be able to book a call back and kind of find out a bit more information. With that being said, I do want to just kind of briefly speak about some upcoming webinars that we've got too. So we do run webinars every week on Sage 50 Payroll, Sage 50 Accounts, so lots coming up for those products, as well as our next webinar in partnership with Advisor Plus, which is going to be on Tuesday the 3rd of December, and that's going to be on do's and don'ts for a successful Christmas party season. Really looking forward to that one. I think it'll be a really interesting session. So head to sage.co.uk/webinars to get signed up for any of those and kind of read about what we'll be covering in them too. But with that being said, that does bring us to the end of our time this morning and the end of the kind of content that we've got covered today. So thank you so much to everyone who did join us. Thank you for your time, really. And remember, you can download the handouts, which will include all of the slides that we've covered today. And then last thing from me, really, you will receive a short survey as you kind of exit the webinar today. If you do have just a minute to fill that out, me, Sophie and Denise would really, really appreciate any comments that you've got from today. We do read every single comment that you leave us and just try to make these webinars the best that they can be. So yeah, if you've got a minute to fill those out, we would love that. But hopefully you've enjoyed it, hopefully you've learned something new, and we would love to see you on some more webinars in the not so distant future. So from myself, Sophie and Denise, it is goodbye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.